what happens here is that we take some money out of the market, for example, for cigarettes, right? I actually saw somebody buy cigarettes yesterday at the supermarket. I haven't seen that in years. $20 for 2 packs. Still too cheap. But the point here is that tax revenue that makes the price of cigarettes so high is taken out of the market for cigarettes and reinjected into society in the form of healthcare or whatever else government does with it. So, sorry? Okay. So what we're going to do here, which is a little bit tricky, is we're going to have to figure out what consumer surplus is, which is the price that consumers face, right, when they go and buy their pack of cigarettes. So what's the price you pay at the supermarket for your cigarettes in a world without taxes versus a world with taxes, and the difference between the price you face and your marginal willingness to pay. We're going to see that that's going to get a little bit tricky here. The other way, we're going to have to look at this problem when you're thinking about producer surplus. Producer surplus here is going to be the number of dollars that producers actually get to take home, because they don't get to keep the tax revenue, and the difference of that price from the marginal cost or supply curve that they actually have here. So let's look at this picture for a second and figure out what these quantities actually are. All right? So if you look at this picture, I have my demand curve in red right here. Right? The market is left alone. I don't charge a specific tax. The outcome I'm going to get is Q star, P star, where my original supply curve is equal to my demand curve. Welfare is maximized. Everybody's happy. Right? We've shown that this has to be the case. Okay, I gotta sneeze a little. Come on. Right back there. All right. So that's the outcome we understand very well. What the specific tax now does is it shifts up the marginal cost of individual firms. We showed that, right? Specific tax shifts up the marginal cost of each firm, which shifts up the supply curve by tau dollars for each individual firm. So supply shifts up by the tax rate, $5 per Bay Bridge crossing or $5 per pack of cigarettes, and the new supply curve is this upper one, S delta plus tau. So the new equilibrium quantity is one where the new supply curve crosses my original demand curve. Demand hasn't changed. So what I'm getting now is I'm getting this higher price, P tau right here. That is the price after taxation that consumers face. So consumers face this higher price, and we're producing Q tau units of output. Now the tricky piece to understand here, and specific taxes are some of my favorite questions, so you should understand them well. Do producers get to take home P tau dollars? What do they have to do with part of that money? So per unit sold, how many dollars do they have to turn around and give to the government? Tau, right? Is there a distance between two lines on this picture right here? Are there any two lines on this picture that are tau units apart? Old supply and new supply, right? So I know these two lines are tau dollars apart along the whole x-axis here, which should be labeled Q. That was eaten, or I forgot to draw it for a third time. So if this is the price that consumers get, I have to subtract tau dollars from that price right here in order to figure out what the price is that producers get. So this is price consumers get, subtract tau dollars. Oh, how convenient, Maximilian, right? The distance right here is exactly tau dollars. So I can just look at QT, the point where that vertical line crosses the old supply curve, that price, wow, terrible handwriting, but that's PS, the price that producers get. Right? So now what I have is instead of both producers and consumers paying versus getting the same number of dollars, consumers pay a higher price than the number of dollars that producers get, and the difference between the two is going to be exactly the specific tax rate. Now before we do welfare, I just want to build some intuition, and I'm going to actually make use of that intuition about 2 slides from now. But before you walked into this classroom, or if you asked a random stranger on the street, if I charge $1 tax on cigarettes, by how much will the price of cigarettes rise? What do you think the most common answer is? $1, right? And that answer turns out to be wrong only in one very, very special, turns out to be right in only one special case. In most settings, the price will go up by less than $1. You can see that here, right? So P star is the price of the market when it's left alone. Then we charge the price, we charge a $1 tax or a tau dollar tax on cigarettes, and what happens is it shifts up the supply curve. Does the consumer price rise by $1? No, right? This distance between PS and PT right here, that's $1. But P star is right in between the two. So price will rise by less than $1 unless there's something perfectly inelastic in here, which we'll talk about in a little while. But this is going to lead to the intuition we're going to use in a second that says there's something called tax incidence, where if you charge a specific tax, a share of the tax burden is borne by consumers, and a share of the tax burden is borne by producers. And the yoga theorem is going to give us some very, very useful intuition in the sense that the side of the market that is less elastic is going to suffer more in terms of how much of that tax burden they're actually going to bear. Pretty cool, I say. But I'm an economist. I have weird preferences. All right? So let's figure out what we came here to do, which is figuring out consumer and producer surplus on this picture. So it turns out the relevant pizza slices I'm going to need are the following. I'm going to need A, this big triangle up here. I'm going to need B, which is going to be, I'm going to try and draw this a little bit better. Come on. B is going to be this thing right here. C is going to be this rectangle right here. And D is going to be this triangle right here. E, little triangle right here. F, little triangle right there. Okay, just to be clear, A, the big triangle on top, B is this rectangle here, C, this rectangle here, D, this whole triangle right here, E, little triangle here, F, little triangle here. This is drawn to scale, beautifully printed in your textbook in many different flavors. Okay, so let's do consumer surplus and producer surplus at Q star, and then at QT. Q star is easy, right? We've done this 2 or 3 times by now. It's P star is equilibrium price, Q star is equilibrium quantity, so it's the area above price, below demand, across the range of consumption. So A, B, and E is consumer surplus. And when you write these tables, always spell out what it is you're doing here. When you mean A plus B plus C plus D, don't write A dash D. I'm going to read that as A minus D when really you meant A plus B plus C plus D. So spell out each individual element of your sums. Producer surplus, area above supply. Remember, we're producing Q star units, so area above supply, below price, over the range of production. It's going to be C, D, and F. C plus D plus F. Since we're not charging any taxes, there's no tax revenue here. And total welfare is going to be A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus F, right? The whole big triangle that we had before. So A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus F. If you think this picture is complicated, just hang on for another 12 minutes. Your head will start spinning. Okay, now let's charge our tax, and let's figure out consumer and producer surplus after we charge the tax. So now the price that consumers pay, PC right here, is this high. right? They're consuming QT units, and this is demand. So consumer surplus is going to be area above price, below demand, over range of consumption. It's just going to be A. Producer surplus, okay? Producer surplus is the area above the private cost of production here, which is going to be our original supply curve, and the price that producers get after they've paid the taxes, right? They collect PC dollars from consumers, but they have to turn around and hand over tau dollars to the government. So the difference between the marginal cost of production or supply below the price they get over the range of production. So producer surplus here is going to be D. So now we're missing something, right? So we've got consumer surplus, A, producer surplus, D, but what about B and C right here? Well, this is a rectangle. The width of that rectangle is QT, so total production. The height of this rectangle is the tax rate. So it's number of dollars per unit, number of dollars taxed per unit sold times the number of units sold. So this is the total tax revenue by the government, right? The area of B is tau dollars high, QT units wide, so the area of that rectangle is tax revenue. So it's B plus C. So what's total welfare now? It's going to be A plus B plus C plus D. So A, B, C, D. So total welfare in a perfectly competitive market was A, B, C, D, E, F. Now we have A, B, C, and D. So deadweight loss, which often is a triangle, not always, is going to be E and F. To celebrate deadweight loss, let's pick a frightening color. I don't know what a frightening color is. I find yellow a pretty hideous color, so you also can't see it really well. Actually, you can. So this is deadweight loss. So deadweight loss is minus E minus F. What else do we note from this picture? All right. First of all, taxes result in deadweight loss. Do consumers win? Do they have more consumer surplus under taxation than they did in free markets? No, right? Before they had A, B, and E. Now they just have A. So consumers lose B and E. How about producers? They had C, D, and F. Now they have D. They lose C and F. Government before had no revenue, so government gains B plus C. So if you add these cells right here, minus B, minus E, minus C, minus F, B you get back, C you get back, so deadweight loss is E and F. These two things have to add up on this side and on this side, right? So you know you screwed up somewhere if you do this summation and this summation and they don't add up. So consumers lose, producers lose, society loses, and the only people that gain here are government representatives, right? That's of course the wrong way of looking at this. Again, this amount B plus C here, that's redistributed to the population. The issue, of course, is it may not be redistributed to the people participating in the market. So we may tax one market, right? We may tax cigarette consumers, and we may then spend that tax revenue on something completely different, like national defense, right? So it may not be recycled, this tax revenue, to the participants in this market, but it gets recycled to society as a whole, which is why we don't say tax revenue is lost or is part of deadweight loss, all right? That's the general intuition between specific taxes. Now, I want to move on and make this much more complicated, because we're at Berkeley, and you totally can handle it. This is going to be a good picture. I had trouble drawing this on paper, so enjoy the next 5 minutes of watching me draw this on the surface thing. Okay, so what I want you to think about is two markets, all right? I want you to think about markets, one market that has a very elastic supply, and I want you to think of a market with inelastic supply. Both markets have the same demand curve, okay? So let's draw these two markets. They face the same demand curve, exactly drawn to the units identically. So 2, 4, 6, 8. Let's go 9 here, and then let's go roughly here, okay? So let me draw the demand curve. And just to see that we're doing the exact same thing in both pictures, I'm getting nervous, you can tell, right? My German TH is coming through. I'm drawing the exact same thing, okay? I am German, so I get to make fun of Germans. What you have here is two identical demand curves. You can see they're both end here at 10.2, and they start at 9.0. So same demand curve in both markets, and what I'm going to draw now is a supply curve in one market that's more elastic than in the other market. And I'm going to start both supply curves off at the same point. How about this one here? And this is 3/4 up. Right here. So the elastic supply curve looks something like this. Okay. The inelastic supply curve looks something like this. If you look at the equilibrium quantity, they cross at exactly the same beginning quantity. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7, right? And here too, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and price is 1, 2, 3, 4 up, 1, 2, 3, 4 up. So same equilibrium quantity and price in both markets if you leave these markets alone. All right. So leaving these competitive markets alone, they both arrive at an equilibrium price P star, and they both would consume an equilibrium quantity of Q star. And in both markets, welfare is maximized. Okay, now the evil regulator comes in, all right? He's not that evil, and she's not that evil. So the way you want to think about it is they decided that a specific tax is in order here for revenue generation or whatever it is they want to do. And what that's going to do is it's going to shift up the supply curve in both markets by the rate of the specific tax. So if we charge $5 a pack of cigarettes, it shifts up the supply curve in the elastic supply market by $5 and the supply curve in the inelastic scenario by $5. So let's draw that. Let's use a different color to keep things interesting. So my tax here is going to be one that's exactly 3 squares tall. Okay, so I'm shifting my supply curve up by exactly 3 squares. So this is S plus tau, right? Again, recognizing that the distance between these two is exactly tau. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. That's a little bit trickier to do here, but just pick 2 points, like this one, 1, 2, 3, and then another point here, 1, 2, 3, and draw a line through it. And again, the distance between these two is exactly tau. you can convince yourself that I didn't cheat here, although it looks like I did, right? If you have a steep affine function, even though the two lines are the same vertical distance apart, they will appear to be closer together simply because of the slope. But if you drew it the way I did, they're both exactly 3 units apart. All right, now let's figure out what happens to consumer price versus producer price in these two markets, right? Where do consumers actually end up paying a higher price than before? So in the elastic supply market, this here now is consumer price. In the inelastic supply market, this here is the consumer price. Whoa, what are you noticing? In which market are consumers suffering, seeing a much higher price increase from the same specific tax? You're whispering it, but I can hear your whispers because I still have good ears. 10 years down the road, that's toast, all right? So tell future generations they'll have to yell, but I can hear you. So elastic supply, right here, what you're seeing is you're seeing that the price now, after the tax, rose by almost 2 1/4 squares relative to what it was under the perfectly competitive outcome. For the same tax, same beginning equilibrium quantity and price right here, the consumer price rises by only 1 square. So consumer price for the same demand curve, right, same starting point here, rises much more from a tax in the market where suppliers are more elastic than in the market where suppliers are inelastic. Let's look at how many fewer dollars per unit suppliers get in the elastic supply versus the inelastic supply scenario. Remember the way to do it? Like in the picture before, take your equilibrium quantity, Q tau, right? Draw a line down, and since I know that the distance between the new supply and the old supply is exactly tau units, the price that producers get here is just PC minus tau, which we've called P tau before, and we're going to continue to call it that. Same thing here. So this here is Q tau in the inelastic supply market. This here is P tau in the inelastic supply market. I'm starting to get excited. This is real economics. This is stuff that Krugman writes about in the New York Times, right? Only you don't realize it. So what do we have here, right? We have two markets with an identical demand curve, right? So if I had a twin brother who was equally as inelastic as I am, and we walked into a yoga class, right? Twins, same demand curves here. But what happens in the left market versus the right market here is that the supply side in the left market here is much more elastic than in the right market here, right? So what's going to happen because of a tax? I think the easiest way to think about it is not to think about consumer price here, but to think about producer price, right? So what happens? The elastic suppliers are seeing a relatively small drop, about 3/4 of a square in the price per unit that they get from a 3 square tax. Here, suppliers in the inelastic supply scenario, they're seeing an almost 2 square drop in the number of dollars per unit that they get after they pass on the tax. So what we've got here again is a perfect example of the yoga theorem. Who does better under a tax, the more elastic or the less elastic supplier? More elastic supplier, right? The more elastic supplier adjusts production in a way that what he sees here is a relatively small drop in the price per unit that he or she gets for their wares compared to what their inelastic counterpart does. Now, this is hard, all right? Here, it also pays off to go to the campus store, get yourself some grid paper, get the cheap stuff. Don't get the engineering stuff, right? Get the cheap stuff and try and draw this. Then what I want you to do, and I'll draw this for you at the beginning of next time, quickly, is draw the same picture, but different, in the sense that take two markets where you have an identical supply curve, right? Exactly identical across two markets, and then draw an elastic and an inelastic demand curve that cross at the same price and quantity combination in both markets and charge a 3 square tax and see what happens. What you should see is that in the market, for the more elastic consumers, right, the market with the more elastic demand curve, consumer price rises by less than in the market for the less elastic demand curve. So you can draw the same picture holding supply constant and putting two different demand curves in there. So try that, and I'll show you this next time. But I don't want to just see one person's arm go up that worked hard and has to sit on a windowsill, right? I want to see lots of arms go up and say, I tried it and I got it. All right, so try it over spring break to wherever you're going. Question? So there's no long-run, short-run distinction here, right? So this is two firms, either long-run supply or short-run supply, doesn't matter. They're facing the same quantity here. But what you could show here is what happens to the dollar value, the change in producer surplus before and after to these producers versus these producers right here. So what you could do is you could actually chop this thing up into pizza slices, figure out what the dollar producer surplus loss is to elastic versus inelastic producers, right? In order to put an exact dollar amount on it, what you would need is you need to know exactly what the supply curve looks like. You need to know exactly what the demand curve looks like, equilibrium quantity and price, and what the specific tax is, right? And in fact, that's what economists do in consulting all the time. We figure out what is producer surplus loss, what's consumer surplus loss from different policies after having spent months and months and months estimating what these supply and cost curves look like. But the point you're making, I think, is a really valid one, right? So we're seeing a big change in price here, but what you're also seeing is a differential change in quantity here, right? Where producers are elastic, you're seeing a big drop in quantity, versus where producers are inelastic, you're seeing a relatively little drop in quantity here. So it's not just the quantity aspect that changes, but it's also the price. It's not just the price aspect that changes, but it's also the quantity aspect that changes. All right, great question. And I don't say that unless I mean it. If I stare quietly at you, I don't think it's a good question. I'm joking. I'll still lie to you. All right, so I've just tried to summarize this thing in words. All right, so what I